to Reality Bytes Radio on the 12th of January 2015, and delighted to welcome back Susanne Posel of Occupy Corporatism for another hour of interesting conversation, I hope. Certainly from her. I'm not sure about me, but certainly from her. Can you hear me, Susanne?
I can.
Good stuff, good stuff. Okay, as I say, we've got an hour, so let's get stuck into it. You wrote an article today. The study explains the narcissistic psychopathy of selfies. Now, I saw this in the news reports during the week, or a couple of weeks ago at least, and they were talking about this, and not necessarily in terms of psychopathy, but just basically saying how vain people were, and it's basically stupid, this kind of thing. But this is taking a whole new approach. It's an actual study that's been done by Ohio State University, and basically stating that people who take more selfies than what is considered normal. I don't know what a normal amount of selfies is these days, but they are so I've lost the train of thought there. Exhibiting narcissistic and psychopathic traits, apparently. You want to tell us about this?
Well, doesn't it sort of make sense? I mean, we've got a generation of millennials who grew up with social media and that type of community and sharing, and the inception of blogs and vlogs where they follow themselves around with a camera and show people what they do all day. I mean, I come from a different generation. I don't understand why it's so interesting to see that everybody puts their pants on the same way, but apparently for the millennial generation, it's very important to see that everybody looks the same, and showing pictures of yourself in all types of situations. They have their cell phone in their hand 24 hours a day. So I think some of them maybe sleep with it. It's definitely the first thing that they pick up in the morning. So it makes total sense. You've got an entire generation that view themselves as special and view themselves as unique, and they're sharing that constantly. And it does breed a narcissistic and potential psychopathic behavior that is sort of cultural.
Well, I mean, do you think it's actually a behaviour they're learning, or is it, it's actually inbuilt into them? Because, I mean, if you're psychopathic in the kind of general definition of the term, you're kind of born that way, and you're going to be like that. Do you think that this kind of technology is kind of not teaching people, but making them more inclined towards psychopathic behaviour?
I think it's the latter. I think it's the advent of technology and the fact that, wherever you are, if you're at the park and your kid does something cute, you can snap a picture and send it to whomever. You can upload it to Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or any social media network and share it instantly. You can do the same thing with a video. You can snap any part of your life and share it with any amount of untold people who are using the internet. That is something that is indicative to millennials. It didn't exist before. I mean, you and I remember when there were no computers, and you had to call your friend, and there were no cell phones, and you had to use that phone hooked up to the wall that had that long cord that you always got tangled up in. That never happens now. It doesn't exist. It's a whole new sense of expressing yourself to people, expressing yourself to the world, and it is in its beta stage because it's the first generation who's ever done it, and sort of indicative to the millennials themselves. They're doing it more than what generations before them would consider normal. They're doing it all the time instead of just a handful of times.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a bit older than you are. And I remember,
you're at the tail end of the boomers. You got a little bit of Gen X programming.
Well, possibly. Well, we all get a bit of programming, don't we? But I remember if I wanted to meet a friend, I had to physically get out of the house, walk down the street to the phone box. Because, I mean, when I was a child, it was quite rare for people I knew to have a phone in the house, even. Weren't that well off or anything like that, and you actually had to go outside to the phone box to make a phone call to arrange to meet somebody. And if they were late or didn't turn up, you had no idea where they were because you had no way of contacting them. And that's just the way it was. And of course, the mobile phone has been sold as this great tool of convenience. You can always know where people are and all the rest of it. Of course, they can lie to you and then tell you they're somewhere else. But these days these phones can be tracked, so then people can find out where anybody is, more or less. But yeah, I mean it's a total change in behaviour within basically one generation or so, and that people. I mean, we'll come on to this later because you've got another article about how people become kind of depressed if they don't have the access to their phones. But it's become addiction. I mean, that's the only way to describe it. These phones have become an addiction to most of the younger generation.
It's a tool. It's a literal part of their existence. It's like putting your pants on. I think about this often when I leave the house without my cell phone. And I usually realize as I'm pulling out of the driveway, and I'll back the car up and stop, and the kids are like, "What's going on?" And Mommy has to go get her cell phone. And every time I do that, I laugh because I remember a time when I just had to have 2 quarters in my pocket to make sure that I could get to a phone booth and make a phone call. But even though I'm not attached to my cell phone that I use it all the time, if I leave the house, I have to make sure that it's with me. That is a new phenomenon. And like you said, my mother used to make phone calls on the party line, and if you were available, you were available. And when I was a kid, you'd call next door or go knock, and if they were available or if they hadn't finished their homework, you either played or didn't. And if you couldn't get a hold of somebody, well, you couldn't get a hold of them. Now you can get a hold of anybody at any time, not only calling them, but here's another phenomenon that's very interesting. People have stopped making phone calls before text messages or messages on Facebook or Twitter asking permission, even in Skype, asking permission to speak to them. Where before, with Gen X and Boomers and other generations who use telephones, they would just make a phone call and see if that person was there. Now this new phenomenon is it okay for me to call you? Or should we text message each other? Or should we email? Or should we post things on Twitter, Facebook, social media? It's very interesting to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a difference between yourself taking your mobile phone. You've got children. The school might have to get in touch with you if you're out and about. That's you're actually using it as a means of communication that's necessary. Whereas these children or teenagers, whatever, it's not being used in any kind of practical way. It's just this thing that they're attached to and doing all sorts of bizarre things on it. Basically, I mean, and it's almost running their lives for them, without them having to think about things. If they want to know anything, they don't, discussion about it. Just look it up on Google or whatever, on the move kind of thing. Nothing gets explained to them. They're just soaking up this information as if it's real.
Well, the internet for them has been with them all their lives. You and I had to go to the Encyclopedia Britannica, or go to the library, or speak to a teacher, or find an authority figure in that area, like a fireman or a policeman, and ask them questions. This is completely different. They don't have to do that. They have been taught since birth that the internet is a plethora of information, and if they have a question, they can go to the internet and ask the question. There used to be that search engine, I don't know if it's still around, Ask Jeeves. And
yeah,
when that first came out, it still is, okay. It was a new phenomenon because people had used Google to just put in keywords. Now Ask Jeeves opened up the idea to a lot of people that, hey, just ask the internet a question and it'll come up with the answer. But millennials already grew up with that as part of their culture, so it's natural to them, like it was natural to us to go to the library and pull out the library cards and use the Dewey Decimal System and find a book and then read the book and gain the knowledge that way. The internet is to them what that was to us.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of again, if it kind of related to 1984, it's destroying language as well. I mean, they're texting back and forward. The words are being bastardized, for want of a better word, into these short little abbreviations and stuff like that. And it's kind of, I mean, it was touted as the great communication device of the 20th century. And here we have children or teenagers and young adults who aren't communicating with each other anymore. They're just texting and doing stuff like this. I mean, it's destroying the art of oral communication, if you like.
Well, you know what's funny is in the 80s, I don't know if you remember Valley Girl and Valley Girl speak, like, Doug, gag me with a spoon. That
Well,
was
I
a
was in the UK then. We didn't quite get that, but I'm sure we
You
had our own
didn't get
version
that?
of
Okay, that was
it.
huge over here in the United States, and any children who spoke that way, their boomer parents were saying the same thing that we're saying now about text messaging and the pulling out of vowels to shorten up the word. They had the same problem back in the 50s when women were secretaries, and they would use the same type of shortening up words to create a language so that they could write dictation. And that was also touted as, oh, it's destroying the integrity of the English language. It's really funny and fascinating to me over time as one generation tries to work within the confines of the technological revolution, and I'm going all the way back to the industrial age, really, when we really started to use machines alongside humans. As it's progressed, one generation back will always complain about how the next generation is dealing with the advent of more technology in their life. It's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, well, getting back to the psychopathic aspect of this article, they have you've got a definition here. Psychopathy is defined as an antisocial behaviour disorder that displays a diminished capacity for remorse and characterised by poor behavioural controls. I mean, that's putting it mildly. But in the DSM manual, they just call it antisocial personality disorder. Why don't they call it psychopathy?
Because
that's what it is.
Because the psychiatric community has not deemed psychopathy as a mental disorder. It is not its own mental. It is a phenomenon. It has a word. It has a definition, but it is not an official mental disorder.
Yeah. And they go on later on in this guy Kevin Dutton, an author of a book on psychopaths and the benefits of being a psychopath, and he states that psychopath is a term that gets thrown about a lot in our culture. Are psychopaths misunderstood? And he goes on to say that psychopaths have a lot of good things going for them. They're fearless, confident, charismatic, ruthless, focused, qualities tailor-made for success in 21st century society. So I mean, we've seen articles like this over the past couple of years. Not glorifying psychopaths, but saying, oh, well, they're all right, really. They'll succeed in the world and get on, and they'll get the best jobs, they'll get up the ladder, and all this kind of thing. And here we are again. It's not a bad thing to be a psychopath.
Well, absolutely. I mean, think about this. The same generation, the boomer generation, who a large majority of them stood up and created the hippie movement and the Enlightenment movement, the idea that the Puritan ethic of work should be replaced with new values and new ideas of what work should be. The radicals that read Saul Alinsky and all of those different groups that came out of there, that same generation 20 years later became the yuppies and created the booming Wall Street that we know today, that later on created the crash in 2008. They set the foundation back in the 80s. Now, 20 years later, those same generation has now implemented police state, implemented lockdown, implemented censorship, implemented controls on the internet, controls of information. It's very fascinating to me. Over a 40-year or a 60-year period, you see one generation of people going from having the idea that everything is free and natural and everybody should love each other and everyone should get along, then going out and getting a job and realizing that they could become members of industry or captains of industry and run the corporations, and they did, and create the monopoly on Wall Street to an extent that had never been seen before, and they did. And now in their senior years, they're possibly realizing what they actually did and what they actually created in a generation entirety, and going the opposite direction, trying to conform to conservatism in a way that they might not understand as a generation totally, because they absolutely rejected the conservatism of their silent generation parents, who actually started the civil rights movement, who actually started the feminist movement. They were trying to work within the system by changing it within the system. Then their children came along and said, well, we're just going to break the system. Then they moved into the time in their 30s when they needed to get a job, and they realized, well, we have to work within the system. Let's make the system better. They ended up making the system better for people who made a lot of money. And then 20 years later, they realized, well, wait a minute, we need to lock down the system, because if you have free thought and free speech and freedom to information, which would then lead to more free thought and more free speech, this is bad, because look at what we did in the 60s. It didn't work, so let's not have that or allow that to happen again.
Yeah, it was okay for them at the time, but it's not okay for anybody else now.
But that's a very psychopathic, if you look at it from a behavioral standpoint of a generation, that's very psychopathic.
Well, absolutely, and I mean that the description here, fearless, confident, charismatic, ruthless, and focused, it describes our politicians very well. And Hillary Clinton, of course, did her thesis on Saul Alinsky, so you know, she's right up there, and she came from that generation as well. So she fits the mold, I'd say.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, you mentioned the police and the police state. We'll move on to perfect timing. ISIS retweets threats against police. I mean, this isn't a new tweet. It's a retweeting of a tweet for twits or whatever, sent out in September 2014. So why are they paying so much attention to it if it's just a repeat of something that went out last year?
That's a very good question. If I were to make an assumption, I would think that it's perfect timing, which is why I named the article that. It just seems perfect. We've had shootings here in the United States of police officers, several shootings, and Mayor de Blasio in New York attended some of the funerals where the police officers were shot, and police officers turned their backs, and they're not prosecuting in New York low-level offenses, thinking that, hey, well, the low-level offenses will create more crime in the city, and then they'll need us. Like we need these police officers so badly that we don't realize that we've been so hard to them in the internet, on the internet, and in the media. We haven't appreciated all the good things that they do for us. So they're going to not prosecute low-level offenses to sort of let crime rates rise, and then we'll realize how much we need the police officers. That's a very psychopathic thing to do, by the way. And what's interesting is the number one job in 2014 for psychopaths was the police department. So I don't know if there's a correlation there, but I find it very fascinating that they would get upset because a Twitter feed that is allegedly tied to ISIS, we don't know that it actually is, but that they retweeted a tweet that's several months old, and then all of a sudden it becomes this whole big thing. Well, think about this, folks. That 14-minute Muslim clip of this film that never surfaced was on YouTube for 3 months before all of a sudden it became a big deal and everybody was offended. Like, nobody saw it in the time between when it was uploaded and when it became this huge deal, and not one person became offended if all of a sudden like an uproar happens because they discover it 3 months later. I think that that's what's happening here. That sort of thing works. It's worked in the past, and they keep doing it over and over again.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's similar to the original fuss about the cartoons in Scandinavia. They'd been out for months and months and months before as well, and nobody batted an eyelid about them until it was all hyped up in the media, and we got this kind of stupidity of, well, Paris, I guess. It's interesting about the police in New York, and they all turning their back and all the rest of it. I thought at the time when all this happens, there's real hypocrisy for you. 2 police officers get shot, and sympathy for their families and everything. But what is it? The figures are that more civilians have been shot by police officers than troops have died in Iraq since 2001. We only hear about an odd 2 or 3 blown up out of all proportion in the media. And riots and all the rest of it. But what about the other, 5,000 odd people that are shot by police officers? We never hear a word about them. But as soon as 2 police officers get shot, then it's a global kind of thing. It goes all over the world. Oh, this is terrible. Look at this. And I just thought it was totally hypocritical of the police officers to be doing this. And it was something like 2,000 police officers turned up at the funerals or something. No wonder crime's gone up. Did they all get the day off? What,
It's
what an advert.
terrible whenever anyone gets shot. It's absolutely horrible that anyone would shoot any person, whether they're shooting a police officer or anyone else, or an officer shooting another person. It is absolutely offensive on a deep-rooted, deep conscious, unconscious level that a group of people that we collectively agree are going to protect our safety is now threatening that safety, and we have no recourse because officers do not get indicted. They get administrative leave, which means they get to sit on the couch for a week or two or a month and get paid. It's egregious that families have to go on without their 12-year-old children or their husbands, who was the sole provider for their family, while the police officer who has a history of targeting African Americans gets to remain on the force and goes home to his wife and his children, and everything's fine. And that is what is upsetting everyone.
Yeah, and he's well paid to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know. Yeah, I mean, I've got a colleague of mine's an ex-police officer and whistleblower, and he was telling me that since 1979, I can't remember the exact figure, but many hundreds of people have died in police custody in the UK, and not one police officer has ever been prosecuted for any of it. Not one. So, I mean, it's not just in America; it's happening all over the Western world, I guess, and probably in the third world as well. Who knows? But
we notice this. We notice this over time. We notice that nobody ever gets prosecuted. Nobody ever gets made to be held responsible for their actions. That it's always by the book. Well, Bill Maher made a statement about police state recently, and he said, well, if it's always by the book, then you've got the wrong book. Maybe we need a new book. Because if this is the standard protocol, then, and this is not acceptable, then we need new protocol.
Yeah, and that's possibly a case where you can judge a book by its cover. If you always get the same result. Okay. I mean, do you want to say more about this tweeting thing, or I mean, what else do you think they're going to do to ramp this up? This piece against the community, if you like, which is what they're doing. They're dividing the community between police and everybody else.
It's a PR stunt. Obama says that they need to make the public perception of the police department a more positive one. And all of the police departments across the nation agree. They're implementing body cameras, which we obviously know from Eric Gardner that it doesn't matter if they're getting filmed. They'll murder you on camera because they know they won't get in trouble for it. So putting a camera on a police officer is not going to stop him from killing you. But they're worried about PR. They're worried about how everyone perceives them. They want to get back to conducting the business that they do, and they don't want people to film them constantly and upload it to YouTube and share it on social media. So their focus is that here in the United States, and if we collectively start to just forget what's happening, then it will work. It's going to take some time, but if they behave themselves long enough, maybe about 5 or 10 years, it will seep out of the social consciousness, and people will forget that the police officers have been doing this for decades, and finally one generation stand up and said no more. And then maybe a generation and a half later, if nobody continues to stand up and say no more, they will have forgotten, and it'll be business as usual again.
Yeah, well, it goes back to the generational thing as well. So I suppose, teenagers nowadays, all they've seen are police officers in black paramilitary style uniforms. They haven't seen the ordinary cop that used to walk about in a blue shirt and things like that.
I was in a toy store yesterday, and they had these Legos, and this one style of Lego had police officers that were driving armored vehicles and looked like the scary SWAT team officers that we saw in Ferguson. And this is a Lego toy for children. And I showed my husband, I said, do you see this? So the children who are going to come in, between 7 and 12 and play with these toys are further going to be conditioned that a police officer doesn't look like Barney Fife, he looks like this, and this is the new look of the officers. And if we don't remind our children what officers used to look like, when I was a kid, you wanted a police officer to come and help you. If something was going wrong, my parents told me, go find a police officer. Now, if something's going wrong, don't find a police officer. we do need people to make sure that our streets are safe. We absolutely do. There are always going to be nefarious and people and crimes and gang members and things like that. But we have to be able to trust that institution. And if we change the way that we perceive them, even through conditioning children with toys to see the SWAT team uniforms and the armored vehicles as normal, it absolutely opens the door to different types of behavior that is unacceptable to boomers and Gen X, obviously. But millennials and the generation afterward, they might not see it the same way if they grow up with it and are conditioned by it.
Yeah, there was a case in the States, I think it was last week or the week before, where a guy took a stray dog to a dog home, and they wanted to have his ID, and they said, I'm just here handing the dog in, I'm not going to give you my name, address, and all that kind of thing. Then ended up detaining him, and then he got shot, he was killed. And I never heard much more in the news about that, just for taking a stray dog into a pound.
Well, he handed them, he had I think it was a sovereign, and he handed them an ID that was not government issued.
Well, it's nothing to be shot for, is it?
Absolutely not. No, I'm not condoning what happened at all.
No, I know you're not. You're right what you say about the police. We used to, as young lads, play football, soccer in America, in the street, which, it's supposedly dangerous, but you could see when the cars were coming, you got out of the way, not like nowadays where you need to be told when to cross the road. And they used to chase us around and kick us up the bum. That's it, and say, don't do it again, boys, and then they'd be back the next day, and that was part of the fun, getting chased by the police, but you certainly wouldn't do it now. You'd be tasered.
No, when I was a kid, the police officers would come, and if you, in high school, if you were out with friends and one of them was drunk, and they would drive the kid home and tell the father or the mother what happened and give them back to their parents. And that was it. That was the end of it. Now, if that happens, the kid goes straight into juvenile custody, which then CPS gets involved. The parents get a knock on the door saying that the CPS has their children and now there's an investigation, and they spend the next couple of years trying to get their kid back. Absolutely, completely different from when I was a child and you were a child to what children are experiencing today.
Absolutely. I remember being up in Belfast once. I was driving through the city centre and I got into the wrong lane and I had to go around this one-way system. And I was trying to get to the ferry port, and I kind of just thought, I'm going to miss the boat here. So I double parks the car, jumps out of it, and I see these two police officers walking up the street, just came out of a building. And I ran up to them because I obviously double parked on the main street and I was going to get in trouble. And before I got within like 10 metres of them, they were going for their guns. I didn't even know they had guns, and they're going for the guns because I was running towards them in Belfast. And I was like, whoa, I'm just looking for directions, But all the time I was asking them where the ferry port was. You could see them almost shaking. I suppose part of this retweeting stuff and threatening to the police is to get them thinking that way, that everybody's a threat. Like everybody, it's talking here about look at their hands. Now, this is giving them the perfect excuse to say, well, he was holding something in his hand, I thought it was a gun. Anything.
Well, absolutely. And they are using that. One guy was shot because he was holding a ham sandwich.
Yeah.
But back in the 80s, there was a lot of gang violence in the United States. I don't know if it was going on in the UK, but gang members were shooting each other. Children were getting shot in the street with drive-bys all the time. And this created the SWAT team that we know today. They didn't have that. They developed the idea of the SWAT team in response to the gang violence because the cops were called to the scene, but they were showing up 10, 20, 30 minutes later, waiting until all the violence was done and everybody was shot because they were getting killed left and right. They didn't have a response in order to facilitate this. Now it's morphed into, before it even happens, we're going to come out with our SWAT team and our armored cars and apprehend and kill in the suspect phase before we even get to detainment, before we even have our rights read to us or the charges read to us. It's a complete 180 where the cops nowadays are conditioned to think that because of all the stuff that was going on in the 80s that seems to have gone underground now and is not reported on or is not seen very much in the social consciousness, now the cops are reacting as if it's always happening and every single person is a suspect and you don't know what they're holding or what they could be holding or what's going on. You have to react first before assessing the situation and deciding what type of reaction is proper.
Yeah, well, we had the gangs in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. We still got them. They're the only ones with the guns over there in the UK. So gun prohibition didn't work for them, but it worked for everybody else. So nobody can defend themselves over there. And the same goes for the thing in Paris, of course. They've got strict gun control laws there in France. And I read one report where one of the people in the restaurant, I think it was, that got shot was shot when he was grabbing a hold of one of these guys' guns. Well, if they were armed, these guys would be taken out in 5 minutes. You know, it's the same old story, isn't it?
Absolutely. Situations are allowed to happen because of conditions that happened previously, and therefore the people who are bad, the people who are doing wrong, are always going to do that. We have to limit their ability to be able to do what they're going to do, not the general public. But it seems to be like the same ideology that goes on with chemotherapy. Kill the host in order to kill the virus or to kill the cancer. So we're going to take away everyone's rights in order that we limit the amount of the few. But the few are getting it in illegal means, so limiting their rights, that it doesn't matter. They're still going to be able to obtain the same direction that they were obtaining before when they had the rights.
Well, they don't wait to be given rights, they just take them. that's the way it is. The rest of us just sit back and take the crap, I guess. Okay, we'll get a piece of music, and welcome back to Reality Bytes Radio on the 12th of January 2015. Okay, moving on. Psychiatrists testing tech to foresee who you will become. And this is all about brain scanning people. I'm presuming they're going to do this from birth to ascertain what kind of person you're going to be in the future. If you're going to be a crook, or you're going to be a drug addict or alcoholic or something, whether you're going to be healthy, and how you perform in school. Apparently they can do all this now with this brain scanning. What have you got to say to that?
That fits in perfectly, because what they're trying to do is get that compartmentalized worker back to work. It's the same thing that happened in the industrial age, when the machinists said, well, you know, we own the machines, we run the machines, we built the machines, we're not going to work for these crappy wages anymore, corporations. And the corporations were at a standstill because they were dependent on the machinists until they figured out, well, they can create, reverse engineer everything and can create a worker that only does one function and spread that machinist's job out by 50 or 100 or even 1,000 if they have to. And that type of worker led to the boom of the industrial age, but it also took away the need for a specialist and the need for further thinking and higher thinking. Because if you build a machine and you are a machinist, then you have to understand a myriad of disciplines in order to get that to function. And this is not necessary if you're going to have an economy or a class of worker that performs a skill, performs a function for a corporation, does their job and goes home. You don't need someone who might work 12 or 14 or 20 hours a day because their machine is part of, it is their career instead of just their job. And Obama has this plan now to allow a 2-year degree, which would be a technical degree, for free for anyone who is willing to work after they obtain that degree. Well, this fits in perfectly with the other information, because if they're scanning your brain and they're looking for your aptitude, they will know what specialized areas you are more likely to be gravitated toward, and they can mold that into the needs of the corporation. So let's say that Google says by 2024 they're going to need 85,000 widget makers, and they let the technical schools know. They let the grade schools know, K through 12, and so these schools are on the lookout for kids who have an aptitude toward making widgets. And they can be molded and directed along the line K through 12, and then given a 2-year degree for free at a tech school so they can learn how to better make widgets, and then be promised a job at Google, and then Google fills their positions that they need by 2024. That's what's going on here in the United States. It's an advanced form of what happened in the early industrial age when they first created that compartmentalized worker. Now they're going all the way back to when you are in kindergarten or pre-K and deciding whether or not you could be a widget maker or a widget builder or a widget fixer. It's the new beta for the 20th century.
Yeah, well, it's very much a brave new world, isn't it? Almost at the point of breeding certain human beings for certain jobs, the alphas, betas, etc. And you know, I heard somebody talking about this in terms of, you know, putting it quite simply, if they suddenly need a lot of miners, they'll just get some short people. You know, they'll breed a generation of short people to go mining on the moon or something. And if they need a load of apple pickers, they'll grow a load of tall people. That kind of thing. And we're going down the same road, except it's an intellectual road rather than a physical one. Where, as you say, they'll do this brain scan to say, well, this person is quite good at you know, maths or something. Maybe they could be a computer programmer, and everything from that moment on is geared towards that child becoming just exactly what the state wants them to become, or the corporation, which is the same thing really. Exactly what they want them to become. If they reckon they're going to need 10,000 of these computer programmers by a certain date, as you say, Google will put out some kind of aptitude test to these people who've been brain scanned and show that kind of aptitude and see if that's the guys for them. And then, I mean, possibly even Google will stump up some of the money for these courses. Who knows? And there'll be Google schools, or you know, whatever it may be. That kind. Do you see it going that far? That to segregating people that much across a fairly broad spectrum?
They've been doing this for a very long time. When Flashdance came out, you know, she was a welder by day, a good stripper by night. Well, there was a boom in strippers after that. Is that a coincidence? Matthew Broderick was in War Games. And this was the first time that anybody had ever thought about, ooh, you mean I can hack into my school and change my grades? Well, they did that a couple of years ago in 2013. Some students in Washington State hacked into their school and changed their grades. We see this happening. The idea is planted in the programming of the generation as their children from 0 to 10. And as they implement the programming, there's further reinforcement from 10 to 20. And we see them then play out their programming as they grow up and as they go through the different phases of their life. I think that this is nothing new. It's just now the corporations have the actual technology. It's not just a fantasy. When we were kids, you know, home computer PCs didn't get to the market until about '96. Millennials have had PCs all their life, and it's been getting smaller and smaller. Tablets and Nooks and smartphones. They have the technology. The corporations have it now, to where they can bypass most of the programming in movies and books and social, you know, ideology. They can go straight to the person because they have the internet. They can connect directly to the person. It's an unprecedented direct communication that was never possible before in previous generations.
Yeah, just keep in mind there that, as you say, that every child more or less has a smartphone or a tablet or whatever. And I did read that the phones are starting to get bigger again, so that they're kind of like mini tablets now. Not quite small enough to go in your pocket, really. But I mean, it's coming to the stage where, you know, we know the advertising industry is all over the internet. Are we going to see companies, you know, actively advertising on people's personal phones because they've had some how can I put it? They've had some idea that this particular person is good at a particular job, and they advertise straight to them and say, "How would you like to come and work for us?"
Absolutely.
I mean, do you see that happening?
Yes, about in some school districts, it's up to 50% of their schoolwork is done online. And so whenever they use the internet, they are being marketed to. That keyword search, that website that they go to, that's all being logged as part of their profile. And so if they're doing a book report on archaeology, then they will start to see more advertisements about archaeology, or when they do a search, they'll find more websites that talk about archaeology, or adapt their keyword search to somewhere that would be applicable to an archaeological theory, or something in the news. We're going to see a lot of that. It's the same type of programming like that I mentioned with Flashdance. You saw a huge boom of girls going into the stripper industry after this movie came out. That's insane. But at the same token, now we have technology. Now Google has technology, or is technology, and we have Google and we have social media, and these corporations can then come in and say, well, if you're interested in archaeology, well, maybe you'd be interested in watching archaeological movies, or maybe you'd be interested in watching documentaries on archaeology, reading books on archaeology, buying an ebook, or watching YouTube videos or channels on YouTube that talk about archaeology, pushing that child or that young adult toward an idea that they might want to do for their life that might not necessarily be an independent decision when they go to actually make that, as whether or not they're going to enter into that field as employment.
Yeah, I just imagined, we'll use Google again because everybody knows who Google are. Imagine Google, flashing up on somebody's watching YouTube or something, and an adult flash up saying, you've been specially selected for an interview with Google in our such and such department. If you're interested, click here. That kind of thing. People will be basically headhunted online, live, if you like. I mean, that's kind of what was in my mind about that.
Sure.
And of course,
that would make it a lot easier. You think about it, it used to be that schools would pay lots of money to send headhunters out to high schools and actually talk to these children and handpick them. That doesn't happen. When I was a kid, you wrote the letter to Dartmouth or Stanford. They didn't come out to see you. Now, they are able to monitor the child's progress, K through 12, to make a decision of whether or not they want to approach the child, and the child never knows that this would be in the realm of possibility, because it's all done through data mining, through profiling, through surveillance, and then selling of that information from corporations to academic institutions. And it's big business. How do you think the NSA gets most of their information? They get it through the corporation, folks. So I don't know why we get so upset when the NSA does it, but we don't even bat an eyelash when someone says that the corporations are doing it. It just boggles my mind.
Yeah, because I suppose the young people who have got their tablets and iPhones and all the rest of it love the corporation because it's given them this technology to work with, and if it causes them a minor inconvenience, then it's no big deal. They don't seem to give a damn about privacy. I think privacy must have been taken out of the dictionary, because I don't think anybody of this current generation knows what it means.
It means something different to them. When we were kids, or when I was a kid, I was a latchkey kid, and don't talk to strangers. And there's only one or two people in the neighborhood who know that you're going to be home alone when you get home from school. I won't be home till 10 o'clock, my mother would say sometimes. Make sure the dishes are cleaned. Don't talk to anybody. If you have any trouble, go to the neighbor. Here's a list of phone numbers to call if you need to get a hold of me. Here's my beeper number if anybody remembers beepers. We grew up in a time where children were being abducted a lot, and Adam Walsh was a huge deal in the United States. His father went on, John Walsh, to do America's Most Wanted, and then we saw criminals all over television, and we would sit with our TV dinners and watch this as entertainment, and then cops came out, and it was a very scary time for children. And so we were very private people as growing up as a culture in Generation X. We have a very strong sense of our privacy. Millennials, on the other hand, have grown up with the internet being a community, and so it's the opportunity to talk to somebody who you can't talk to physically in anywhere in the country, and social media is accepted acceptable, and sharing your life, like we were talking about the selfies, that's all acceptable. That's a new idea, a totally foreign idea to Gen X and Boomers, who grew up in completely different ways than having this medium that connects you to everyone and seeing it as a good thing. We see it as a bad thing, but simply because as children we were programmed to keep our privacy to ourselves, keep to ourselves, always make sure you put all your money back in your wallet and put it back in your purse before you leave the register, always carry your keys in your hand in case you have to, like, poke somebody's eye out or something, always carry a flashlight with you. Women had pepper spray. It was a very, very terrifying time to just walk the streets.
Well, I don't think it was that bad in the UK, but there was certainly a little bit of that going on. But I guess it's even worse now because they turn off the street lights in Britain at 10 o'clock at night now till 5 o'clock in the morning, so it's pitch black. And apparently crime isn't going up. That's what they told us the street lights were for. But I digress. It always amazes me. You be walking down the street and you pass, 2 or 3 people, they've all got a phone in their hand, as you said. It's like 24 hours a day, and particularly young people. And although not necessarily, I mean, people my own age talking on the phone about private stuff and things, and you think, well, I don't want to hear it, but they don't seem to care. It's almost like they think that nobody's listening and nobody can hear what they're saying. The millennials have grown up with more integration in the internet sphere than in the outer sphere, like everywhere else, like reality, like real physical world. They have they have different ideas of what's discussed in public and what is not. And basically, it can be discussed in public. Nothing is private because they live in a world where nothing is private. We, on the other hand, some of us were raised to be seen and not heard. We didn't ask, still to this day, my mother won't tell me what her finances are or, anything like that. And my mother's been sick for a long time, and my brother and I are trying to decide if one of us needs to take a power of attorney. So I would have to know what her finances are. But she comes from a generation that, there are some things you just don't discuss. You don't discuss politics and religion at the dinner table. Who even eats at the dinner table anymore? Completely different ideas of what we should hold back and what we should give to the public. Yeah. I was in the bank a few weeks ago, and it's the first time I've seen it, but apparently it's quite prevalent here, where people are giving their fingerprints to cash checks and stuff. I just think, well, what are people doing? I mean, if somebody asks you for your fingerprints, you've broken the law generally. But here are people just walking up to the counter. There you go. There's my fingerprints. No problem at all. Not knowing where that's going to go.
Well, if you remember in the 80s with Nancy Reagan, she had the DARE program in the United States, and all of us and Blockbuster Video got together with this, and they created a profile so parents would bring their kids, a picture would be taken, all the fingerprints would be taken of the child, their height and weight and all their vitals would be taken and then put in this database. And that was a sort of programming for little Generation Xers to say, well, in case something happens to you, we have a current photo of you, your height, your weight, your fingerprints. We know everything about you, just in case something. Remember Adam Walsh? Remember how he was abducted in a Sears? You don't want that to happen to you. Remember all the little kids who are being stolen left and right, and little kids fall down wells. Little kids don't fall down wells anymore, but apparently in the 80s everybody fell down a well. It was a very, very scary time, and I think that might have been the beginning of the programming to where millennials say, well, yeah, sure, it's a part of me. It should be my identification. It would be the most secure because it's physically part of me, my fingerprint. Why wouldn't I use it? It's better than a password. But I think that programming got started with the DARE program with Nancy Reagan, and the fear-mongering that preceded the acceptance of it as a password, in lieu of a password.
Yeah, the guy that was cashing his check must have been in his 60s, I think. Okay, we're back on air, I believe. I don't know what happened there. Just we've got 2 computers sitting side by side. One had the internet, and mine just went off. There you go, on the same network. There you go. So this is yeah, yeah, still there. Yes. Okay, we've only got a few minutes left. We've talked a lot about technology and people's reliance on it, particularly the younger generation. And your article here, I think you wrote this back in December. Hey millennials, iPhone separation anxiety disorder makes you dumb. You've got a question mark on that. Again, it makes me wonder. If this is the case, if people do get seriously anxious and stressed out about not having their phone, and it does happen because you see teenagers, if they can't find their phone, they're in a kind of panic. I don't know if that's just because they've got somebody important they want to text or whatever, but they seem to go into this kind of blind panic about this little piece of technology. And it makes me wonder, what if there are power cuts and they can't charge them up? Are we going to see a load of crazy teenagers running around the streets absolutely demented? Actually having to go into people's houses and knock on their door and ask if they're in?
Yes. Oh no, these kids, this is part of their life. This is an extension of their actual body. So without it, it would be like chopping off one arm. You can't work without both of your arms. You can't walk without both of your feet. They cannot function. The most fascinating part of the study for me was the second part, when they had the word puzzles and they were constantly calling. And these kids were constantly checking their cell phones to see what was going on. They're waiting for a response. They post stuff on social media. They wait for a response. As soon as they get that beep for Twitter, they're back on Twitter. As soon as they get the beep for Facebook, they're back on Facebook. Whichever social media that they use, this is how they communicate all day long with their friends and family. And so, and they're so integrated with their friends and family. So that this is the fact that it disrupts their ability to perform cognitive skills means, unfortunately, we've got a generation of people who might not be able to function as an employee for an 8-hour period, and the quality of their work would be greatly diminished over even the last generation, because they're constantly checking their cell phones for that instant gratification, that information on the internet that they so desperately need.
Well, it is an addiction. That's the way I can see it. I mean, if you can't do without something, it's an addiction, and certainly this addiction has been through the media, through the corporations themselves that sell these things. Oh, look what this can do for you! You'll have so many friends, and you'll be able to talk to your friend across the world any time of the day or night, whatever. But you just won't be able to do without it. As you say, it's like it's almost on the verge of transhumanism, as you say, because it is part of their everyday life. It's part of them. I mean, it's gone are the days of the imaginary friend. This is a real physical friend, and it just happens to be a piece of technology.
Yes, absolutely. And here are the days of Linus and his blanket, because they just can't do without it. And no matter how old they get, they have to have it next to them. Otherwise, they cannot function. And this is a huge problem, because these people are in their 20s and early 30s. So even though we're going to see a huge startup boom in the next decade, over the next 10 years, lots of millennials are going to be starting their own .com companies and startup companies. Most of these companies are doomed to fail because these kids don't understand what it takes to facilitate a position of a CEO or president of a corporation. They don't have the work ethic. They are easily distracted. They are more involved in their social life than they are their work life. This is not good. If you want to talk about problems with the economy and all of these fearmongers out there talking about, oh my God, the stock market's going to crash, blah, 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 blah. Look at the millennials, because over the course of the next 10 to 15 years, they're going to be running the businesses. They're going to be elected into seats of power. They're going to become captains of industry. And they would rather sit and text and go surfing and go shopping than they would actually performing a function and supporting the GDP or the economic market at large. This is a huge problem, actually.
Well, in terms of what I mentioned earlier, in terms of literacy as well. I mean, a lot of these kids can barely string a sentence together if you were to try and have a discussion with them, because they're so used to just an abbreviated form of speaking that they use in text language. I don't know how these people are ever going to run businesses and stuff like that without the basic understanding of how to communicate face-to-face with another human being, because they don't seem to have it.
I agree. They are used to Skyping and texting and they have video chat. I mean, it's not like they are completely devoid, but most of the communication is nonverbal. And so, and even though you can sit in video chat and see someone, there is something about being physically in front of someone and reacting to their reactions to you and facilitating conversation and reading all of their body cues that is missing, and we are misfiring. Our brains are misfiring in understanding each other and our intention because we have taken that out of the equation. We are not physically in front of each other. And you're absolutely right. It breeds for miscommunication and inability to function. So the way in which our society built itself up with small business and the middle class, that's all about to drastically change. The idea of the store may be a novelty, but what really happens is the commerce on the internet and the connections between the on the internet, and that means that understanding and complete understanding of communication is going to be lost, and it's going to have to be made up in some other way.
Yeah, well, if we can't communicate, we can't sort out the problems. I think that's and that's part of it as well. I think the next generation won't be able to think critically at all in any kind of capacity. As you say, they're just reliant on these pieces of technology, which are, an extra limb basically, and God help their children. I don't know what's coming for them, but if they can't communicate with each other on a face-to-face level, I don't know how they're going to communicate with their own children even.
A lot of people just hand their kid a tablet or put them on a video game or turn on the internet and then go themselves to their laptop or their tablet. And you see people in restaurants sitting together having a meal, and each of them are on their device. You see whole families doing that at home or out in restaurants. That is becoming the absolute norm. They would rather share something with each other through their phone and share a video or share a picture than they would even turn the device toward the person they're sitting next to and show it to them on the screen. That's huge to me. The changes that are about to happen in our society because of technology in the next 10 to 15 years is absolutely drastic. It's a complete 180 to whatever any Generation X or Boomer who is still alive will even understand. It's completely different.
I agree with you. Okay, that's our time up for today, and hopefully we'll see you back again next month.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, thanks very much, and I'll need to cut off now because I've got to do some more stuff on air. And talk to you next month. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.